Hello, and welcome to channel Ein Key, and I am your host, Voluntary. As the Western world goes into steep decline, especially the United States Empire, there are people who acknowledge this and others who deny it. Among those who acknowledge it, there are various theories about why it is happening. Some people say there is something uniquely Christian about the Enlightenment that made the Western world a shining beacon of freedom and liberty that has not been seen the world prior. When Europe went from a backwater to dominating the entire world, there were several revolutions going on at once. There was political revolution, economic revolution, religious revolution, philosophical revolution, and technological revolution. Starting with the Renaissance, continuing through the Enlightenment, and then the Industrial Revolution, the countries of Europe and their colonies came to dominate the world. Starting with World War I, there has been a decline. In that war, the powers of the Western world put a gun to their collective heads and pulled the trigger. It was the first step in a long process, with many opportunities to change course, that culminated with the state of the world as it is today. When a country is in decline, some people blame it on a decline in traditional values, and to many, that means Christianity. Well, there is indeed something special in the Western world and its relationship to religion. In most of history, and even today in the non-Western parts of the world, the relationship between religion and government is quite different. Either the church is subservient to the state, or the state is subservient to the church. That's basically it. Had Rome not fallen, it is likely that we would have the church subservient to the state, because that's the kind of empire Rome was. When Rome fell, something interesting happened. The military structure of the invaders needed something only the church could provide, and that was moral sanction. The church needed something only the invaders could provide, and that was military might. Neither, though, was willing to be subservient to the other. That precipitated a full millennium of rivalry between the two, as each sought to, and failed, to become the dominant partner. This was the seed which eventually bloomed into the separation of church and state. They didn't have separation back then, but they had a distinction. Ultimately, in many countries, there were two separate sets of laws, the king's law and the church's law. The secular government was concerned with what is legal, and the church was concerned with what is moral. This led people to be able to think about legal and moral as two separate questions. At the end of that millennium, when the Protestant Reformation hit the scene, eventually religion was made into a personal thing instead of being part of the government. Eventually, that is. There were several big struggles along the way, but the destination finally arrived at the separation that we know today. It was the distinction of church and state that was unique in the early Western world after the fall of the Roman Empire. The effect of separating church and state was to separate morality and law. That, in turn, meant that it was possible to judge a law to be immoral, and even to judge a ruler to be immoral, but without the church having the military might to do something directly about it. The church could rouse a mob, but that was a power best used sparingly, because a mob, once roused, is difficult to put back down. The Age of Enlightenment took the humanism of the Renaissance and refined it into an ideology never before seen in the world. Classical liberalism, the first ideology to ever put the individual first. That leads to one final question. Is there perhaps something special about Christianity itself that, when forced to be separate from the government, can lead to an ideology that puts the individual first? Not all branches of Christianity have gone there, and not all do go there. But is there room in the theology for that, unlike other religions? I actually think it might be so. Now, Christianity has quite a wide range of interpretations, and some of them go directly against classical liberalism. But I think there is room within that range of interpretations to include it as well. To illustrate, I would like to compare Christianity to a fairly similar religion, Islam, and focus on one of the most important differences. The key difference is temptation and the role of the individual with regards to temptation. The Christian and Muslim views on temptation are radically different. So, suppose a very attractive person walks by. Whatever you are personally attracted to, imagine that person. I don't know who you are thinking about, but that doesn't matter. You're thinking about him. Now, naturally, some part of you is thinking, yeah, that person is hot. I would like that. Well, you're now tempted with lust. In Christianity, you are the one to blame for being tempted, not the hot person. In Islam, the hot person is to blame for tempting you. In Christianity, since you are to blame, you must control yourself to deal with your temptation. Christianity ultimately preaches the virtue of self-control. In Islam, there have been incidents that use words I won't use on YouTube to describe how some men treat women who they see as tempting to them. They feel justified because it is her fault that she tempted him. That single difference is important. If you are responsible for your temptation, the burden is on you. If the other is responsible for your temptation, then naturally it makes sense to punish the other. If the church and state work together, then naturally it makes sense to make laws punishing those who tempt others. Assuming you had a society with differentiation between church and state, like happened in medieval Europe, but replace Christianity with Islam, I do not think it would work. There's too much emphasis on morally policing each other. In Christianity, the attitude is best summed up by a quote from Martin Luther. You cannot keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair. An ideology that centers on the individual. Classical liberalism can only come from a morality that centers on the individual. Since Islam blames others for temptation and does not focus on individual responsibility with regards to behavior, classical liberalism could never come from Islam. Ultimately, I do think that Christianity does occupy a special place in producing classical liberalism. I don't think it is as key as some people think it is. Too many people think the abandonment of Christian values is what precipitated the decline. They overlook the fact that from the fall of Rome to today, the church was never dominant like that, and the church was never subservient, but always separate to some degree. The value that is lost, the morality that is lost, is that as we decline, there is a distinctly different morality in play that does not recognize the distinction between law and morality. It is the loss of that distinction that creates the moral aspect of the decline in the West. Get woke and cancel those with whom you disagree. That is not the Western Enlightenment tradition of disagreeing with someone yet still respecting their right to their own opinion. Thank you for watching. We're now in the double digits for subscribers, and hopefully we will only keep growing. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe to help my channel grow.